Welcome to 5 on the Go, the ultimate career development podcast, created for students learning to uncover their career paths. In this episode, learn about how a pandemic sparked a pivot from a career in finance to the risky world of becoming a startup, co-founder, and CEO while finding joy and fulfillment by embracing uncertainty. This is 5 on the Go, where your career journey never stops, and neither do we. Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of 5 on the Go, where we have the opportunity to connect with alumni that have graduated from the University of Toronto, where they take the moment to explain to us the opportunities that they've gained since graduating from University of Toronto, insights from their time at University of Toronto, and journeys and lessons that they've learned on the way. And today, we have Zachariah joining us, who graduated from the University of Toronto. But at that time, University of Toronto Mississauga was called Arundel College. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy. Jimmy, welcome.
Thanks.
Welcome back to UTM. I know it's been a while since you've been here, but tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, first of all, and it has been a while. I was doing the math in the car. It's roughly 23 years since I graduated from the business management program, where I majored in business management as well as sociology.
Okay.
And currently, I am the CEO and co-founder of a cool tech startup called Quilt.
All right, awesome. You know what? I'm really looking forward to learning more about Quilt. But before we get into Quilt, we're going to rewind sort of the 23 years, almost like 20, 25 odd years ago, because at that point in time, a lot of students, and I feel even today, current students, some of them already know where they're going. And I think you kind of had that situation yourself. You kind of knew what you were doing, where you were going, or at least you were on that. How did you get to that place of kind of understanding where you wanted to be?
Actually, I think I was almost like the opposite in that way.
Right.
Like, so I kind of fell into a career through high school co-op.
Okay.
So when I was like in grade 12,
Okay.
I did high school co-op and randomly chose accounting as the path. I didn't really spend a lot of time on it. It was just, I was good at math. And those are, back then, no internet. We didn't know a lot of what was out there at all. It was just these basic things. And I also wasn't exactly that enthusiastic. I just wanted to finish everything and start working as soon as possible. So through my high school co-op, I just ended up being hired by that company for the remainder of high school.
Oh, wow.
And through all my years at Arundel. So while I was at Arundel, for those 4 years, I would work part-time, 15 to 20 hours a week in between classes, and then full-time in the summers, which then led to the next, 15 years after that of different finance and accounting roles, but in a situation where I didn't really, it was definitely not my calling. Yeah. It was more something I fell into, and it was all that we knew at the time. Just kind of, you just work. And that was my mentality, is finish as soon as possible and make money. And then once your resume says you're something, it's hard to get out of it.
That's right. So kind of transition from one area to the other. So let's talk about that for a second, because that's pretty interesting. I think, you've been in finance and accounting for the last 20 odd years. And you made this major shift into founding your own startup, Quilt, which we'll get into a little bit later, as we've already said. But the question here is, 20 odd years is a long time. I mean, even for me, it's hard to imagine what I'm going to be doing the next 20, 25 years, let alone students who are currently, in their undergraduate program, and what 25 years later looks like. Can you talk to us about, your last 25 years? Yeah. When did you know that it wasn't
for you and that you would venture out on your own?
Yeah. I think I figured it out later than I should have, but so what happened was I guess I fell into the trap. And I wasn't that enthusiastic about school or anything. I could do it. It was kind of easy for me, and I just finished.
Right.
And then work was work. I was lucky as a student to be working in a corporate environment and, learning, working with grown-ups and, having to deal with grown-ups on the phone and stuff I was scared of to do. But I was bored out of my mind. Like, I never liked it. But I just thought that was work. Right. So I was just like, who likes their job? That was really my mentality at the time. Until I guess a few years, maybe 2-3 years after I graduated, maybe 3-4 years, I got a job at Accenture. So that was the biggest company I ever worked for. And I was working with a team of about another 50 people that were kind of doing my job, the same job.
Okay.
And it was kind of my first exposure to that. I think it was there that I realized that, some people actually like doing this stuff. It was like, just in my mind, I was like, there's no way anyone likes it. This is just work. This is life. This is what it's like to be an adult. But there I kind of realized, okay, there's some people that are really wired for this type of thing. Like, they're really enthusiastic about it. They stay late to build more models, and while I'm just kind of, putting in about 40% effort, just bored. You meet a lot of cool people and a lot of smart people, but you kind of see the difference, right? And I think that was an eye-opener for me.
Right.
And I actually, at that point, made a redirection, and I went to teachers college because that was actually something that made a lot of sense to me. And there were opportunities back then where you can go to Buffalo on the weekends. I could work full time. So Accenture was good enough to just let me do this. So I said, hey, I'm not staying here forever, but I want to do this program.
Right.
Can I commit to you guys for a year while I do this? I have to leave early on Fridays. And they did that for me. And I did it. I finished it. But at that point in life, I'm around 30, 31 when I finished. Second kid just born, got bills to pay, and getting a full-time teaching job just wasn't something you get right out of school. There was a long, I don't know, up to 10 years even of having to do either long-term occasional roles or supply teaching. And I was just like, you know what? When the market gets better, I'll go back to teaching. For now, I'm going to find another accounting job. Okay. So I just went back to that. Little more senior roles. Now I'm kind of managing people a little bit. So it was getting a little more interesting, but still, definitely wasn't, didn't match my personality, didn't match, I guess, my skill set. I guess what I've been gifted with wasn't being used at work.
I get where you're saying.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then eventually, by fluke or just being blessed, whatever it is, I landed a director of finance role at a tech startup called Digiflare.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years ago or so.
Right.
And that kind of turned everything around, in terms of, one, the job was better because in a tech startup you have to wear as many hats as you can wear, especially in an operations role or administration role. In those settings, you kind of fill in the gaps,
right?
And I loved that. That's when I was like, oh, this is fun now, because my accounting stuff was maybe 50% of the job, and then the other 50% was
you were learning new things outside of finance, accounting.
And you're close to the business,
right?
You're helping it grow, and if you leave tomorrow, there'll be an impact. Whereas Accenture, I could literally leave the next day, and they could just pull someone in.
You're replacing you with it.
Yeah. So it was all of those things I started to realize matter to me, and more importantly, that put me in an environment that was completely different.
Right.
And now I'm surrounded by, I guess, in my eyes, magicians. I'm not a tech person, so I don't know how these things work. I can't build anything like this, but I could see it being built. Now I'm around people I could ask questions to, and then I had the idea for Quilt, but I could confidently proceed with expertise behind me, kind of supporting what's possible, and that kind of gave me the confidence to make that move.
Get to where you're. So it seems like you were in very structured situations, structured organizations, went to maybe a place of creative chaos, but that just brought or allowed you to grow in a different way and take on new challenges, new risks. You started learning new things, and that has allowed you to get to where you're at today. Was there a specific moment or a story that impacted your transitions? Is there anything that specifically like resounds to you after all this time to where you're at?
I think really it was the whole extension thing. Like, is seeing people being happy doing something I wasn't happy doing, because I really thought this, and maybe I was just like so far behind in my thinking. But I really just thought work was like not. You shouldn't expect it to be interesting. So I never really put any thought into my career. And I fell into something and I could do it. I never had a problem. It was just I was bored. I didn't feel like I was doing anything. And then with teaching, the 4 months of practice teaching I did, I loved it. Like I really did. Like it was a totally different world. But actually satisfying and gratifying to me. And I think it's important. Like I think that, and I don't think I was ever told this. I wasn't going out looking for information. I mean, it was hard back then. We didn't have Google and stuff. So, but I think it's important for, students to really pay attention to their natural personalities, their natural interests, like what they like to do when they're not thinking of making money. Because one thing I've definitely learned is if you're the best at whatever you do, you'll make more money than whatever the worst doctor out there, like because you're an expert. That's right. And so I think it's important to pay attention to what you're passionate about. And again, everyone has different stories, different situations. Like if your situation requires money as soon as possible, then you got to take that path, right? It's not everyone's like so fortunate to be able to just follow their dreams. But if you can, like I was in a situation where there really was no rush. I was living at home, didn't really have any bills to pay other than my car or whatever. So I could have done anything. I could have volunteered at things that are more along my interest, intern and things like that. So I think that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned, like through that and through this whole path process. And with my kids now, that's really what I'm pushing. Is more paying attention to what they actually do in their free time, or what they're actually good at naturally. And seeing then, how you can turn that into a career.
I just want to get back to what you stated earlier about your educational pathway, because I get the business management side and how that transitioned into the accounting finance. But you mentioned you also took sociology. Can you talk to us about how sociology may have impacted your last several years in work, or maybe just connecting with people or getting to where you're at?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about while I was at school even. So business management was just kind of something to do. Like I was interested in business. And always thought, I'm gonna, we watched Young and the Restless back then, and Victor Newman and Jack Abbott. Like that was kind of the way I looked at the corporate world, right?
That's right.
So I was always like, that's probably going to be where I am. Like, and so that was just the path you naturally take. Plus, I was doing accounting where I was working. It just kind of made sense. But that program required a second major. And my actual interest is people. Like that's just naturally what I'm interested in. And sociology was kind of just a natural choice to take. And in my years here, sociology was when I was like in class and listening and interested.
That was the one that like woke you up. You didn't need caffeine.
No, because there was, not every course, but most of the those courses I was taking out of actual interest in what the professor was talking about, and the books we were reading.
Yeah.
Whereas in business management, I was already in the corporate space, like, you know, at a low level, but kind of seeing, you know, business up close, and then being taught certain things or being advised in a certain way of how to act and like all this in my head, like, and I'm young, so I'm kind of like thinking, okay, maybe I'm wrong. But
no cockiness whatsoever. It was just like,
but now that I'm old, I can tell you I was right back then. Like some of the things that we were being told was just like, it's not that complicated.
Right.
Like, you know, if a company isn't happy with how you interview and you were being yourself, then it's not a fit.
That's interesting.
You don't need to, like, you don't need to pretend to be something else, because it's not going to work. Otherwise, right? So you know, that's kind of a thing that bothered me while I was actually would throw things out here and there where I'm just like, that's not actually, you know, don't say this in an interview, act like this in an interview. And I'm like, I get, there's like a balance, right?
Yeah.
You know, you don't just like go to an interview like you're hanging out with your friends, but you also don't need to like change. You're interviewing them at the same time, you know, to a certain extent, right? So those kind of things, and I'm like, they're just humans, man. Like it's, you know, they kind of presented it as a way that like we're so low as students, and you know, when you're great like me, then you know you'll understand. But I was always like, well, no, I work with people that are actually much, you know, at your level or higher, and they treat me real good. Like they're just regular people. I've been to their house. Like
it's interesting because I went through an interview process where I got feedback saying that I was smiling too much, I was joking around too much, or maybe I was just too happy.
Yeah.
And I was like, at the end, when I got that feedback about you're smiling too much, you seem too happy, I was like, why would I want to work for this place? And don't get me wrong, it was a well-known tech company. I was just like, I don't know if this is my kind of environment, if that's the feedback I'm getting.
But that's important, right? Because if that's something that bothers them, then that's a huge red flag if you like to be happy.
Right. No, that makes so much sense. And thanks a lot for sharing that, because that will resonate with a lot of people, because I think a lot of young people are looking for those big organizations where it looks good on your resume, but I don't know if it really helps you get the social skills, that cultural setting from a workplace.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of fake happiness or out there. Like, so, you know, there's big organizations that, you know, not going to name them, but everyone kind of tends to view as, oh, wow, what a great place to work. Because of all the fancy stuff they provide.
Right.
But if you actually go to these organizations, they're no different than any other in terms of the good and the bad. Those free things is just because they got a lot of money to burn. Does not mean the employees are happier. That stuff fades real fast. A week of perks, those perks become part of your routine, and they're no longer important. How you're treated, really all that matters, like in a job, I think, to retain an employee, well, there's just a few things. Pay them fairly, try your best to give them fulfilling work, and treat them with respect, and you know, and those are, it's not that complicated. Free lunches are going to keep someone around. And I could talk about free lunch like for an hour, because I've been in those situations as a finance director of several startups.
Signing off on
it just drives me crazy, some of the things that I've seen. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. You know, I wanted to break away and talk about how it takes a lot of courage to make the move that you made. It's a significant risk. Lately, there's this movement in social media and the world of discounting the idea of having a job, so to speak, in favor of entrepreneurship or being entrepreneurial over sort of traditional work. What's your take? How do you feel about that? Is it in everyone's capacity to do what you did at this point in time?
I think, technically everyone can, but I don't think everyone should feel the need to. I think it's really important to, I mean, I probably said this already, but to know yourself, pay attention to what makes you tick. And like I said, some people, like, they're just wired to be like, I'm just talking on the business side. There's a million like career paths, but it's just where I live, where kind of climbing that corporate ladder is fulfilling to them. And it wasn't for me. And it, you know, and it wasn't like, there was people like me, and then there was people that wanted to climb the ladder, and you can see their paths. Like if you look at, you know, where they are today from when I worked there 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, you can kind of see the branch off of everybody. Like some people just took totally different paths. Some people are still there, like from when I started. Right. And I could have told you they would still be there, like, or I would, it's not surprising to me. Yeah. Because of wiring, right? Yeah. So, and me doing what I'm doing now, like I've done things to kind of change my career path or whatever. What we're working on now, I mean, you say courage, some might say crazy. Like I feel like it's crazy sometimes, but like, but at the end of the day, it's if you've got something in you that's telling you, you know, to do it, or and you have the ability, no matter how like crazy it may seem. I think it's really important to kind of go with the no regret policy and just try if you can. If you can. Yeah. And I do wish, I often wish that I was wired for the Accenture life. Yeah. I feel like it would have been much easier.
There's a safety net.
It's just easier. Like, I mean, not easier. I mean, I shouldn't, like, it's not easy, but it's less wild. Right. It's more structured. You go to work. Yeah. You do your job as best as you can. You know, you learn this and that, branch off within the company until you go where you want to go or get to where you want to get to. But I just, there was nothing in me that wanted to do that. Yeah. So for me, I feel like I'm in the right place now, but it's hard. Like it's scary. It's like crazy. It's like, you know, the odds of success in these kind of situations are very low. Okay. But at the end of the day, I don't want to be 75. Thinking like, what if you I understand what you're saying. And it's this, I mean, and that's another thing I guess I would encourage in any student is to use this time, if you can, to pay a lot of attention to what you really want to do. Learn as much as you can right now, because there probably isn't another time in your life where you're going to get 3-4 years where your only responsibility is to learn. And I didn't have that guidance. It was more like you're trying to get a career. There is don't get me wrong, it's not meaningless, but at the same time, you know, you should try your best to like get into stuff. Learn about things you wouldn't otherwise have time to learn about.
I feel like post-secondary higher education is a great place to fail safely. Yeah. In trying different things out, being able to explore different opportunities, gain a new set of skills that you might have not thought that you would have gained. I gotta ask, like, so when did you take that leap of faith? At what point did you decide you were going to jump into this entrepreneurial opportunity? Can you talk to us a little bit about that time?
I was working full time. And my co-founders were as well. They still are. But I had a COVID layoff in 2020. Okay. And at that point, I was like, I'm not going to bother looking for another job. I'm just going to focus on this. And things have dragged out way longer than I expected. But that was kind of the thing that just allowed me to just move, like, clean break. I didn't have to walk away from something, so it was a little less like dramatic or less of a big deal, as opposed to, like, you know, putting in my 2 weeks notice without any plan, right? This was more kind of like, we've been working on this, like, I mean, when I say working on it, we were like a lot of talking for a year, not really making any progress. And then I was like, let's just go ahead and do it, put some money into it, and see where we go.
And so I think this is probably a perfect time to talk about Quilt.
Yeah.
What is Quilt, and why did you start Quilt?
Okay. Maybe I'll start with why. I think that usually helps people understand it a little better,
Okay.
what we're trying to do. So the kind of the origin story, or the thing that kind of represents what we're doing the most, is when my son was 1.
Okay.
I was going on a trip somewhere and getting on a plane, and for whatever reason, again, wiring, my wiring often takes me into if I die, this, right? And my whole life I've been like this, but it was always not in a scary way. It was always kind of oddly positive.
Yes.
My life is so good, when it's done, who's going to be there, who's going to care, those kind of weird, it's a little weird, but it is where my brain goes. But in that moment, it was different. It was okay, if something happens to me on this trip, what bothered me is this kid is not going to know me. It was a big, he would never have spoken to me. He would never, he would have no memories. So in that moment, I wrote a letter, quickly, whatever. I don't know what I wrote, but I threw it in a drawer somewhere as a contingency plan, right? So there's something.
One day.
At least there's something, right? And but I made it out okay, and we moved a bunch of times, and that's long gone, and then that's kind of the spirit behind what we're doing. And then fast forward 15 years later, it was now my friends mostly have kids, and we're in a different stage in life. And when I would throw that out there as an idea, the feedback I would get is kind of not that they would think about it like me. I know I'm a little extreme on that,
right?
But more oh yeah, that's a big problem. So Quilt, what we're building at Quilt is a private digital platform for users to document their lives authentically.
Okay.
So outside of social media, in your own space, to speak freely. There's a bit of a journaling component. You can post pictures, you can post videos, you can kind of have your own little private Twitter feed. So there's that component to it, where those that don't, it's for everybody, but I would say 95% of social media users are really just consuming the 5% content,
right? So true.
And it's just because I think there is a bit of a natural nature to posting on social media, which is why most people just aren't drawn to actually doing it, but we love we get caught into it, right? So that's usually that's why it works. But the way we look at it is everyone should have something to say, and everyone's value should be higher than what we're treating it now. We do so estate planning today is wills, life insurance. What material things am I leaving behind to take care of my family, which is great, which is we do that right. But at the end of the day, there's this big gap in what really matters. I don't think I don't get a lot of pushback on this, but I think it's just more, it just hasn't culturally become the norm, which we're trying to make, is that we actually leave ourselves behind more, so that my great grandkids can look me up and kind of see what the type of person I was. And with Quilt, with all that functionality, we're hoping to be able to pry and poke at you and get the information from you. It'll be slightly activity based, prompt based, so to pull you in, quick activities, just so even if you engage with those for 10-15 seconds a day and you do nothing else, you'll still be leaving something,
right?
So that the person looking at it 100 years from now can be like, oh, that's what he was like.
It's a treasure trove of opportunities to learn about Jimmy Zachariah, humanize who this person was,
and that great grandchild has that opportunity to almost feel some form of who you were at that point.
Yeah, and that's the essence of what we're trying to get to. Well, the essence is trying to capture the essence of the person. With that, for the user, our hope is users are alive for 80 years using it, right?
Yeah.
And there's this whole benefit of self-reflection, self-authoring, almost valuing yourself a little more, to a point where you're saying what I have to say actually matters, what I think about things actually matters, and what doesn't really matter at all is what the other person thinks of what I'm saying. You know what I mean? It really is irrelevant to what we're trying to do.
I love that story that you shared with us of your colleague who received all these documents, I guess, from their grandparents just inheritance of another form. And it's just so wonderful to know that Quilt does that. How do people get hold of Quilt? Like, where can they access?
Yeah, well, we're very early stage, so we're still building our MVP, our beta version. I don't know when this will be seen, but I believe by the time it is, the beta version will be available on iOS and Android in the app stores. And this version is about maybe 60% of where we want it to be, but we're putting it out there for feedback, testing, for kind of to analyze a little bit to see what users are engaging with, and it's part of the process. But yeah, we'll be always looking for feedback. That's the main thing, and then as we go through this whole, I can go on for another 10 hours about the whole experience of, trying to build an app out of, mostly bootstrapped funds and trying to find investors and all that. Like, that's all part of this kind of, game that we have to play. But we will have a functional, very basic version of what we're putting out for people to start using.
That's awesome. Yeah. So that'll be part 2 of the podcast. So Jimmy, just wanted to say thank you so much for being with us here on 5 on the Go. We've had the opportunity to learn about who you are, some of the things that you've learned along your journey of getting to where you're at today, some of the lessons that you've learned, and what stymied you to get to where you are in founding Quilt, and also access it and have a lot of fun integrating the opportunity for our memories to be a lasting lifetime thing for others to take care of. Jimmy, once again, thank you so much for returning back to our wonderful campus. I know it's a lot different from 25 years ago, but welcome back, my friend.
No, thank you. It's been great.